Afternoon. Hope you're enjoying the sessions. My name is Alan Leveritt. I publish the Arkansas Times. We're putting this event on along with ACIA, the Arkansas Cannabis Association, Trade Association. I'm here today with Dr. Joe Thompson. To my right, Joe is the president and CEO of the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement. That is at the University of Arkansas Medical Science Campus. Dr. Thompson, I first met him when he was a Surgeon General of the state of Arkansas under Governor Huckabee and Governor, what's his name? Beebe. Shit. Been a while. Under Governor Beebe and Governor Huckabee. And the reason he's here today is to talk about some groundbreaking research that his organization is doing. It's a National Institute of Health grant, and they're researching marijuana and how it's impacting healthcare in Arkansas. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Thompson for a moment and have him just tell us a little bit about what it is that he's doing.
Thank you, Alan. Thank all of you for being here. Our Arkansas Center for Health Improvement has been around about 2 decades, and we have been working on different policy issues, whether it was the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act or trying to have better access to care in rural parts of the state. And in that process, the legislature passed what's called the Healthcare Transparency Initiative. It's an initiative under the authority of the Insurance Department that healthcare systems, Medicaid, Medicare, the commercial insurance systems, put their claims into this transparency initiative that allows then the insurance commissioner and others to see how the healthcare system works. So it doesn't have anybody's name, but it has unique experiences. On a claim, when you go to the doctor, when you go to the pharmacy, it has your diagnosis, it has what lab you got, it has what your prescription was, and it has what the health insurance company paid. So that's been in place. We've used it to watch the pharmaceutical companies to make sure that we did a study for the insurance department about looking at the cost of insulin for diabetics to see if that was going up. We looked at areas where women that needed to get mammography for breast cancer were not getting it. We've looked at parts of the state where an insurance company said, well, there's not any psychiatrist in this area to be able to contract with, but we could say, well, wait, here's a psychiatrist that the other insurance company's contracted with. So that's what it's been around for. It's been used by researchers for different activities. We got about 25 researchers at UAMS using it, and actually some other entities using it too. So when the voters put medical marijuana in, the General Assembly made it possible for us to import the purchase information, again, not personal names, but the purchase information that then it was BioTrax, now it's Forian, is tracking to make sure people don't get too much and see what the effects are on either diagnoses or claims or opioids prescribed. So we put a grant in to the National Institutes of Health. They don't have much research, and we may want to go into why that is true, but they have not done much research on medical marijuana. And in September, we got a call from the head of the institute saying, we want you to work on this because you're the only place that we have seen that has the ability to look at the good or the bad associated with medical marijuana.
You're agnostic you're not an advocate and you're not a critic of cannabis.
We are. This is a new therapeutic that has a big question mark about what its effects are. So yes, we're not a proponent and we're not an opponent. We're just saying let's answer the question of what are the effects of medical marijuana on the healthcare system.
So, for example, when you get your medical marijuana card, it's tagged, is that right? There's an identifier, not with your name on it, but there's an identifier with that card. And then say you're getting an opioid prescription.
Right.
What happens?
So if let's take me for an example. Joe Thompson has a unique 45-digit ID that's nobody can break the code. It's kind of like cryptocoin, or not
cryptocurrency.
Cryptocurrency. That's right. Bitcoin cryptocurrency. Nobody can break the key, but it's traceable. so that when I go to fill a prescription, nobody knows it's me, but they know that there's a 58-year-old white male that went to fill a prescription. And that they can see how often I fill that prescription, if I'm supposed to stay on that prescription, whether I didn't stay on it. And then the researchers can look at groups of people to say, okay.
And how do they know that you have a marijuana card?
The medical marijuana card has a unique ID also that BioTrax and Forian has, and that company is going to put this unique ID on it so that we can link the two together.
So they can look backwards, is that right?
They can look backwards in the medical marijuana purchases. We can look backward on the healthcare claims that people have had, uniquely link them together. Again, we never have anybody's name, but then we can see whether there was an effect.
So once you get your medical marijuana card, they can go back and look and say they can see perhaps that you were getting opioid prescriptions. And now what you're hoping to find out is after they get their marijuana card, does their opioid use go down or does it go up, for example?
And Alan, I just want to say this. We're not going to know any individual's profile, but we will look at a group of individuals that have PTSD, as an example, that may be on anti-anxiety drugs, other prescriptions that they are getting from their pharmacist. We see when they start medical marijuana and observe to see whether those prescriptions, the level of those prescriptions, the frequency of those
PTSD or whatever it is,
addictive prescriptions go down. Somebody with chronic pain that's on high-dose opioids, we can see whether their prescriptions for opioids go down after they start.
So what is actionable about this? So let's say you find out that prescriptions for PTSD and opioid use drop after a large group of people get their card. What do you do with that? How is that information actionable?
Well, I think it's important because there's been so little research done on marijuana. Any new information is going to be, I think, important and impactful. And direct answer to your question, I think if we see positive effects, then the receptivity, the willingness of the traditional healthcare system to embrace medical marijuana and use it more, I think will go up.
What do you think it's going to take to get the healthcare industry to recognize medical marijuana and fund it like they would any other treatment on your health plan?
Well, I think it's going to take several things. I think the first step is what we're hoping to do, which is to characterize what the effect of medical marijuana is on health and diagnoses and potential reduction in harmful prescriptions or other things that are happening. Over time, it's going to take some changes because historically, marijuana has been a Schedule I drug by the Food and Drug Administration. That means the Food and Drug Administration has said it has no medical value. That's a pretty strong message to physicians across the nation. And I think we're going to have to be able to say, okay, it may be Schedule I. I mean, drugs can move between schedules, too. We may find that FDA is more willing to move it to a different schedule over time as we learn more about what its effects are.
And so that brings me to why there's so little information, and it's because it's been very risky for individual docs and institutions to do research. Is that right?
Well, I asked my policy team to pull out some of the major kind of federal legal challenges to marijuana over the course of our country's history. And just to run through those, it's kind of interesting. You know, medical marijuana or hemp, its parent was a major crop exported from the United States, one of the largest.
George
Washington. In the top 5 of George Washington's crops on his plantation. It was not for medicinal purposes, it was for industrial purposes at that point in time. In the 1800s, lots of different drugs became marketed out. We didn't have a pharmaceutical industry, you didn't have pharmacies, you didn't have any retail. It was really the time of snake oil salesmen. And you ended up with people selling things in brown bottles for different ailments, and some of those brown bottles ended up having chemicals, harmful chemicals. Some of them had narcotics, some of those had opioids or opium, and some had medical marijuana. And in the 1800s, a lot of folks ended up either becoming addicted or sometimes ending up, committing suicide with those. And so they really came under kind of a negative connotation. If you're ever in New Orleans, the first pharmacy that was ever a retail pharmacy and license is now a pharmacy museum, and it goes all the way back into the 1800s. It's really remarkable what people sold and what people bought and what people claimed in the 1800s about what worked. So when the 1900s rolled through, Congress started taking some control to try to have some standards on food and drugs.
And so the Congressional Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 required the labeling of cannabis in medical treatments. 1937, Congress started to tax both industrial and medical marijuana, so it was an accepted treatment at that point in time. In the 50s, however, there were penalties for using marijuana that were not under the industrial tax or the medical taxed marijuana sources. And then in the 70s, with the Controlled Substances Act, that's where medical marijuana got tagged in the Schedule I, no medical use, and it became illegal with stiff penalties for the possession, for the use, for the distribution of medical marijuana. You all know the last few decades it's flipped back at the state level, but it's still illegal at the federal level to possess or to distribute marijuana. Now, how does that play out in research? Well, if you're a big research institution like UMS or Harvard or any other big research institution, you get most of your money from the federal government. You get your Medicare paid for from the federal government. You get Medicaid dollars coming through the state paid for from the federal government. You get many of your drugs from the FDA, from the federal government. The CDC, another agency, pays the health department and UMS to do public health surveillance. So if those entities took on research money and actually touched medical marijuana, they would put all those federal funding mechanisms at risk. So that's why we really don't have much good, high-level investigations historically in the medical cannabis space.
In the research you're doing, you're not actually doing placebo and you're not doing patient testing.
We are not dispensing marijuana to patients. We're observing the changes in the health
data.
system.
Your
point medical marijuana was introduced. Yes.
Any questions right now for Dr. Thompson? For what he said?
I'm confused about how you track the patients that get a medical marijuana card that maybe are non-opioids or are, and how you track the ones, you're saying the drop in use of people that are getting those prescriptions. How are you correlating that?
So we are not tracking any individual patient, just to say that again. The way we do it, we have what is called, I'm going to go deep in the weeds to answer your question, but I'll come back to make sure that I successfully responded. We have it's a 45 randomly generated unique ID called a hashed ID that we instruct entities that have data that are going to be put into this of how they have to use it. So we tell Blue Cross Blue Shield for all of their people that are insured, put this 45, go through this algorithm to create this ID that nobody has a key to before you send this that data. We tell Delta Dental the same thing. So for example, I have an insurance, I have my medical insurance with United, and I have my dental insurance with Delta Dental. We tell both of those companies how to create a 45-digit unique ID for all of their enrollees, and then when it comes together, we can match an individual with United's experience and an individual with Delta Dental's experience. It's me, but my name, nothing about me is available for researchers to look at. So then, with those claims, which are, when I go to the doctor and I fill my cholesterol medicine, or go to the pharmacy and fill my cholesterol medicine, the pharmacy sends a claim in. It says, Joe Thompson came to Kroger Pharmacy on February the 23rd, and we gave him 30 pills of 30 pills at 10 milligrams. All of that information on the claim ultimately comes look at the utilization patterns of individuals with different conditions. PTSD, depression, we look at groups of individuals, not a single one. That same process, the legislature put in place a pathway for BioTrax, originally, it's 4A now, the company that traces the medical marijuana purchases. They put in place the authority for the insurance department to do the same thing they're doing with Blue Cross and Delta Dental with BioTrax. So that information, with the 45-digit unique ID, if I had a medical marijuana card that I purchased, it would come across that 45-digit ID, and we would pair it with the United or the Delta Dental claims data and be able to look at. The numbers do match because the algorithm that the data owner, okay, whether that's Delta Dental or United, they're told how to do it for the unique individual. So they do match when they come to our center. We don't. So the question is, I understand this, how does the medical marijuana card get matched? Okay? So BioTrax has the medical marijuana card, and when you go into the dispensary, they check, I've not been in a dispensary, but the dispensary checks with BioTrax to say, are you eligible with your card, and how much are you eligible to purchase on this day? And they record how much you did purchase on that day. Okay? Then, in the future, we will engage with BioTrax and tell them how to put that 45-digit unique ID for Joe Thompson on that record. And then that's what they will send us to pair up with the health
They
care.
don't send you anything with their patient's name.
We don't ever know the patient's name. And because every data supplier, whether that's Blue Cross or Delta Dental or BioTrax, creates the ID for me in the same way. The ID is the same across all three of those entities. Yes.
Going back to the fact that it's been practically illegal to do research on marijuana over the past 50 years. If his research comes through and says, we're looking at PTSD, we're looking at people taking Xanax or whatever it is, and you see the people with those cards, what they were doing 3 months before the card, they're not doing 6 months after the card, that's a really strong indicator that this medicine works. And also from a legal point of view, it gives an enormous amount of ammunition towards fending off more prohibition. On the other hand, if it goes the other way, it goes the other way. So that's why I've been so interested in what he's doing, because this is not advocacy. This is science.
And I recognize, it could cut both ways, but I think there's enough movement, enough growing knowledge that there are benefits in certain ways. I think that's why when the NIH Institute director, called and said, we want to fund this grant, and we talked about, well, why are you picking this grant? He said, this is a grant that actually can look at a statewide population. We get a lot of proposals where it's advocacy proposals or it's opponent proposals. You're coming in agnostic to what the outcome is, and are going to be able to look at the whole population of the state, not just a special group that has been handled.
And when do you hope to, of course, if we do not get legal marijuana, when do you hope to have results?
Well, I think it'll take us a year or two before we get solid results that we can publish out. The recreational marijuana if it passes, will be an endpoint, but we'll have 3 years before medical marijuana was available and 3 years since medical marijuana was available.
And why would recreational marijuana create an endpoint?
Well, it may not create a complete endpoint, but if marijuana in this state were available recreationally, a lot of patients wouldn't go through the process of getting a card, and we would not be able then to link to their healthcare experience.
How did you've been something of a political insider over the years. How did things change so much
know, sometimes I look at, Arkansas up until Obama, and I'm thinking, how the heck did Arkansas change so much today from where we were? And how did, on the flip side, how did Arkansas change so much of being implacable foes of marijuana to having it, apparently it's going to pass, if it gets on the ballot, it's going to pass for recreational, and again, just a 10 or 15 year period.
Well, I think you've seen dramatic change in a lot of our societal perspectives over the last 15 years. We've gone from a complete Democratic state to a hard red Republican state. I think people also are recognizing that the promises of the traditional healthcare system may not be as complete, if you will. And so we're looking for alternative treatments, alternative therapies, and obviously medical cannabis has had a long history. It was put into the illegal space, and I think at least across many states, most states now, the state populations have made a decision to bring it back on as an available therapeutic.
It's interesting, I read one time that, that Richard Nixon, as an attack on the counterculture, was largely responsible for enhancing the penalties of marijuana in 1970.
Well, I think you've got a long history of political discourse. Don't pull me into politics.
Okay. Any other? Do I have another question? Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you can share your perspective on payers. Even as early as yesterday, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he talked about his personal expense for purchasing medical marijuana to treat a physical ailment that he had, and said it worked way better than any medicine he had taken before. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share? What's your perspective about how long or how far we are from payers, insurance companies, from being able to take a look at the data that you are considering, but where are we in terms of how long do you think, or what do you think it's going to take to get payers to acknowledge this as a treatment and hopefully offset some of the costs for medicinal patients?
So I think that's a great question, and I'm going to take it in a couple of additional directions too after I try to answer. I think it's going to be a while before your insurance company is going to have medical marijuana as a therapeutic that is going to incorporate into its payment plan. I do think our study, if it shows benefit or if it shows cost reduction, then that will force the healthcare insurance companies to at least consider how they might. Now, why do I think it'll be a long time? It's because I think until you get that federal Schedule I drug classification changed, insurance companies are going to be just like their academic research enterprises. They're not going to want to take the chance of being placed in an oppositional, illegal situation with the federal government.
I'd like to ask about the viewpoint that the medical community, the traditional establishment medical community has towards marijuana. There was a gentleman that said here in an earlier session this morning, and he had PTSD ever since he was in Vietnam when he was 21 years old. And he said, he had just almost ruined his marriage. It's been a long, long journey. And he said, I'm here today because I'm desperate. Nothing has worked. And I've been to my family doctor, and my family doctor will have nothing to do with marijuana and tells me I shouldn't even be thinking about it. And but I'm here to try to find out more information for myself. And it was a very moving story he told. So you hang out with doctors. What's going on with there seems to me to be an enormous amount of skepticism from the medical community about the efficacy of marijuana.
I think there is. I think the traditional clinical community was trained, if you will, that medical marijuana, or that marijuana generally, was an illicit drug and that did not have any benefits. I think you're seeing some physicians at least be more open to considering alternative therapies, including medical cannabis. I think until you start to be able to show quantitatively, that's another reason we took on this study, until you can kind of show the benefit. Physicians are driven by data. And until we have the data that drives, awareness, it's going to be hard to get behavior change in the clinical community. So that was another reason that we really felt, there's just a big question mark of what are the effects of medical cannabis. And so when we put this grant process together with my colleagues, we got some from the College of Pharmacy, some from the College of Medicine, College of Public Health, when we put this study together, we said, how can we safely, with no exposure, no liability, no risk to individuals, better understand what the impact on medical marijuana is, how they're using healthcare. And if we can show a benefit, then I think that will open the doors for awareness and more adoption and acceptance of this therapeutic.
Y'all, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, I'm really interested in research because we already have a study of Medicare patients where it says that every single state that has legalized has had a drop in opioid death. So that's a good start, and this will just exponentiate the information. The other thing is, you asked him why there's been such a change. It's because it works. It's because it works. And the other thing that happens is you've got a camp that says it's a wonder drug, it is not. And you've got a camp that says it doesn't work at all, it does. And so I think we have to find that middle pathway. But, it's no wonder drug, it won't do it for everybody, but it does it for the vast majority. And it, like that man this morning, changes their life.
Yeah.
And I just want to pick up on the opioid epidemic. We are losing people every day to that epidemic. It is getting worse because of the mental anguish and stress that we've been through with the COVID pandemic the last two years. And I think that may be, if I were anticipating where our study has the earliest observation of potential benefit, I think the prescription drug use on the opioid front may be the place that we see the first positive.
Okay. Folks, we've run out of time, and let's give a hand for Dr. Thompson.
Thank you all for being here.